Good afternoon everyone and welcome to the Governance, Audits and Standards Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Ian Holder, Chair of this committee. I'd like to draw your attention to the following: housekeeping and safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble by the statue of Queen Victoria in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, if you signed into the Guildhall, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. Live web streaming. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed. Can I please remind all attendees to turn their microphones on to speak and then off again once you've finished speaking. Members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Please can I ask members and officers to introduce themselves, starting to my left.
Peter Bell, City Solicitor.
Richard Adair, Councillor for Nelson Ward.
Gerald Vernon-Jackson, Councillor for Milton Ward.
Councillor Russell Simpson, Councillor for Hilsey Ward.
Spencer Gardner, Member for Drayton and Farlington.
David White, External Audit Manager for Ernst & Young.
Andrew Britton, External Audit Partner for Ernst & Young.
Paddy May, Corporate Strategy Manager.
Steve Belshaw, Group Accountant, Technical and Financial Planning Team.
Helen Clem, Finance Manager, Technical and Financial Planning.
Richard Webb, Deputy Director of Finance.
James Harris from Democratic Services.
Thank you everyone. We've not received any apologies for absence apart from possibly Councillor Brown.
I think I'm Stuart.
Evening, Stuart.
But definitely not Judith.
And we'll move on to item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare in respect of the items to be considered at this meeting? No, nothing. Thank you. And then move on to item 4, Annual Governance Statement 2023-2024. Oh, the previous minutes, sorry. Item 3 is minutes of the meeting held on 27th of November 2024. Are members happy that I sign the previous minutes as an accurate record? Okay. I'll sign them in a minute. So, now item 4, Annual Governance Statement 2023-2024. Paddy May, Corporate Strategy Manager, is in attendance to introduce the report. Paddy, members have read the report. Is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. So there were a couple of minor typos that have been picked up between this version that's been sent out and the final signed version, which has gone to the external auditors. Usually they are very, very minor. Make no substantial difference to the actual document. This report comes to Governance and Audit and Standards having previously been considered in draft and developing form in previous months. So members should be very familiar with most of the content. We do have a duty to produce and publish the annual governance statement, setting out how the authority has complied with its local code of governance and meets relevant accounts and audit regulation. The AGS sets out all the systems and processes in place to ensure that business is conducted lawfully and that we use public money economically, efficiently and effectively. The document also highlights where there might be areas for development in organisational governance and how these might be addressed, based on an analysis of a number of sources, including the annual audit letter. It also includes the annual opinion on the effectiveness of the internal system of control from the Chief Internal Auditor. Finally, it should be noted that a consultation is currently underway, led by SIPFA, which may mean that future statements are presented differently or might contain different information. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions? No? Everyone's happy? Members, it's recommended that the committee agrees the annual governance statement 2023-2024 at Appendix 1 to the report. So do I have a proposer? Thank you, Gerald. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Richard. Is the recommendation agreed, members? Agreed. Thank you.
But I'm worried that Paddy is looking very, very thin. Is local government reorganisation taking its toll, Paddy?
Thank you. So moving on to agenda item 5, the audit results report. Andrew Britton, partner, and David White, senior manager, are in attendance to introduce the report. Andrew and David, is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a couple of things from the executive summary. As you say, take the report as read, but we are in a good place ahead of the 28th of February backstop for 23-24 audit opinions. It is important to remember that under the government legislation, we needed to disclaim the 22-23 accounts in December, and therefore we were never going to be able to issue an unqualified opinion on the 23-24 accounts, as discussed in the previous committee and highlighted in the FRC's accessible guide. This is because of the pervasiveness of the opening balances. The comparative balances movements in the, from the disclaimed year is too significant in order to conclude full assurance has been obtained. Therefore, the overall opinion will be disclaimed. However, we have completed a significant element of assurance, and the audit process has been positive for 23-24 for all concerned. There are a number of areas which are outlined in Appendix A of the report, which we've provided to you, which will show the level of assurance we have been able to gain. This is obviously a significant difference to the report we gave you on the 22-23 audit. The impact, as I said, of the opening balances on the transactions in the year, or indeed the slightly more nuanced elements in terms of the way that the accounts are constructed, has meant that for areas such as PPE and reserves, we're unable to gain full assurance. This is just to stress to members, this is nothing specific to Portsmouth. This will be the same situation across all councils who have a disclaimed opinion for 22-23. However, therefore, we have been able to build a good platform of assurance in terms of rebuilding in line with the FRC guidance that we and the other firms will be following in 24-25 and onwards. When we have more detailed guidance as to how this works, we will share this with both officers and members as part of our 24-25 planning. A couple of things just to highlight to you. In addition, on page 49, we give you details of the materiality that our audit was done to. This is planning materiality of 14.3 million against 12.2, which was what we had in the audit plan. The reason for this is that the planning and the audit plan, it was based on the prior year accounts. The final figure is based on the year-end accounts, and gross expenditure, which is the basis for materiality, was higher in the 23-24 final accounts. Other point to highlight in terms of the value for money conclusion, as it says there are no risks of significant weakness that we've identified in our work, and therefore that element of our opinion would be unqualified. At that point, I will just pause and ask David just to update, because we appreciate that at the point at which we wrote this, there were several items ongoing. So just David to ask to give you an update on the status and just highlight to you the differences that were found as part of the audit. David.
Thank you. So, yeah, on page 49, there is a brief summary of the main areas which were outstanding at the point in time that we issued the report into papers. There's further detail on that then in Appendix C to the report as well. So just taking each of those on page 49 in turn briefly. So we have now completed that follow-up on the issue around property valuations, and all of the work on valuations is now substantially complete, subject to the sort of final stage of internal review. As a result of that work, we did identify some immaterial audit differences, which won't be adjusted in the final version of the statement of accounts. There were 3 of those in total. One was what we would describe as a factual misstatement of just under 300k, and then 2 which are projected, so they're extrapolated across the population based on the errors found, with a total value of just over 3 million, all sort of resulting in overstatement of assets, but say not material. Then the next item was around pension liability valuation. That work is now fully completed and reviewed. Again, there was one audit difference arising from that since the report was issued into papers. That one has a value of 1.6 million, resulting in an understatement of the pension liability, but again, that will be unadjusted in the final version of the accounts and is not material. The internal review of PP valuations, as mentioned, is close to completion. Similarly for journals, the work on additions is fully completed and reviewed, and there's nothing further to report. We are as far through our general audit procedures and concluding procedures as we possibly can be at this point, pending the receipt of the signed paperwork and just sort of finishing off on our side.
So pause at that point, only in addition to add a thanks to Steve, to Helen and to Richard and the team for their support in completing this audit. As members will remember, it's only a couple of months since we came with the 22-23, so it has been a tight schedule that we've been working to, but I'm very pleased with how it's gone. So pause at that point, Chair.
Thank you. When do you think you'll be back to be able to give full assurance? Would that be next year?
So we've talked through with officers. Final reviews, including our quality reviewer, will be complete this week. So early next week we will give an indication that we are all clear, and Chris and yourself will be cleared to sign first half of next week.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Gerald?
Is there anything we should be worried about?
There is, other than the matters that David raised, which we consider to be immaterial, there's no issues that we found that quotes you should be worried about. The adjustments that we would expected to have been made. Those that have been left unadjusted, we are content that they're immaterial and do not need to be adjusted in the final version.
Thanks, that's very helpful.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Thank you. In which case, members, are we happy to note the report and the comments of the committee?
Yeah, but I think we should also thank people for their work on this, both within the council and our external auditors, because we've got to get it right.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Right, next agenda item 5. This was the last minute addition. The Statement of Accounts 2023-2024. Members, I've approved the consideration of this urgent item, Understanding Order 57, as a decision is required to be made before the backstop date of the 27th of February 2025 for finalising the 2023-2024 accounts. Richard Webb, Deputy Director of Finance and Resources, and Helen Clem, Finance Manager, are in attendance to introduce the report and answer questions. Members have read the report. Is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
Thank you, Chair. No, I think you've just had a detailed summary from the external auditors, but just to highlight the recommendations, it is that this committee approved the accounts, and also the one that gives you delegation to sign any, should there be any subsequent amendments during the final closure procedures that the auditors wish to undertake. I will just point members to the appendix, which does highlight some of the changes that were put through, and they link back to the audit report that you've just seen. So, thank you.
Thank you, members.
Yeah, I just wanted to really highlight, because I know this was emergency, put in as an emergency. It's quite thick and substantial, and while it might just be the first 10 pages, if you ever did want to use reference, you'd probably need a good bit of time to look at it. May request that maybe not have it so last minute, so we can have a bit of time to actually go through it. I said this was only put in for my pigeonhole yesterday, so me as a member, it's like I'm not going to get through this in that short amount of time. So I'm just a bit surprised, Chair. Unless there's something else that I'm missing here, but we all got this yesterday.
Seen some of this. So.
Yeah, I'm just curious of why it was added as an emergency. We didn't have, a week ago.
So we've been working very closely with the auditors right up to the last minute to get this completed, and it is my understanding, and I will put my hand up for this one, I had not appreciated that the final accounts were actually part of this pack, so they have been sent out, possibly in error, but we did meet with yourself, didn't we, and some of the other councillors back in November to take you through the accounts and where we were up to, so their availability is there, and we can make it more obvious as to where it is for people to look at earlier.
Oh yeah, it's just really good sometimes to reflect on things, and just having a little bit more time than 24 hours. That's on the reflection of the entire report as a whole. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just also just add to say apologies for the lateness of the item, and also the fact that we weren't expecting you to read the whole statement of accounts. No, obviously with the processes we've been going through, that the auditors have just explained some of the backstop changes. This was later than we'd normally anticipate, and hopefully going forward, this will be included in the pack in the normal way. And so we do bring the accounts at an earlier stage, and this is the final process for approval, but they are available publicly and on the intranet if members would like to read them, and we're happy to share that link again to members in future so that you can read them well in advance if you'd like to.
Thank you. Yeah, but I think everything past page 15 is what we saw in November, isn't it? Yeah. Members, were there any questions? No. Members, the recommendation is that the statement of accounts be approved and authority be delegated to the Chair of the Governance, Audits and Standards Committee to sign an amended 2023-2024 statement of accounts after the 20th of February 2025, should this be required, following comments by the Auditor. Do I have a proposer? Gerald, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Russell. And is that agreed, members? We need a show of hands. Thank you. Thank you. Next is agenda item 6, report of the independent remuneration panel. And I think James is just going to go get Steph. Yeah, you're okay to leave if you want to.
You're going to miss all the fun.
Right, thank you. Members, we're on to item 6 on the agenda, report of the independent remuneration panel. Members, you will recall that this report was considered at the November meeting and deferred to this meeting under Standing Order 40P in order to allow members, as offered by the Independent Remuneration Panel, the opportunity to discuss the report and ask questions in person. Amended to the report are responses from the panel to the questions and matters raised by the November meeting. And I'm delighted to welcome the Chair of the panel, Steph Nailtowski, to the meeting. Members, I think you've all had the report with the responses. Do you have any questions to ask Steph about those responses?
Yeah, I do, Chair. Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for having time to come here again to allow us to ask questions. I just want to reiterate again, last time we had this in, I was saying how really it's inappropriate thinking about councillors having pay rises considering, cost of living at the moment, and, but considering it's done every 4 years, we do have to look at it, we do have to review it. But then even since then, now with devolution, there's even more question marks. So it's like, well, how much of this is actually going to be effective? Will it only be effective for 1 year, 2 years? We probably won't even get to the 4-year mark for the new review. Well, under this particular council, it'd probably be under bigger ones. So there's always that to consider as well. I think one of the main things that was highlighted was the benchmarking between the SEE and the CIPFA, and how we come under more one than the other as a unitary. So kind of just the thought process, I suppose, or the decision reasoning behind basing it on one and not the other.
Lovely, thank you. This is better. And obviously, I want to actually have a proper dialogue and answer your questions as broadly as we can. This was my first year on the panel. I've got 2 panel members who have been on for about 8 years. And one of the issues you've got is if you only meet every 4 years, you have to almost, climb up the ladder again to remember where you were 4 years ago with the current process. So again, there was a lot of, I think that's what we did before. We always did it this way, type of discussion going on between the 3 of us. And I understood that SEE data was historically used. I saw, as the elected chair, no reason to challenge that. I think we were looking more at the bigger picture items about, where the allowances were, causing a problem of attraction or retention. But we just assumed naturally that as 4 years ago SEE data was used, and possibly 4 years before that, we continue to use it. And actually, Sit for Data does compare very well at the basic allowance level, and therefore we were more focused on the individual positions.
I think that's because there's quite a lot of disparity between the two, and I think that's why it was like it would have been better to use one that was more that aligned with, I suppose, Portsmouth City Council. But fair enough. I think that's I can understand that. One of the things, actually, in some ways, actually, Gerald's going to be mentioned here twice, because one of the things that we kind of highlighted was the pay for the leader. As Councillor Madrick mentioned, that when Gerald used to be leader, he had to have, if you don't mind me saying, Gerald, he had supplementary work to make up for the money to be a leader and also to live. And we were very, aware of that, and we thought to ourselves, well, why can't we be more aligned with other council leaders that have enough to do the job and concentrate solely on being the leader of the council and of the city, which is so important? So what was the process when looking at that of the leader of the council?
I'm in a fortunate position that, having worked quite closely with the council for 7 years until January last year, I'm acutely aware of some of the impact responsibility a lot of the cabinet members and others have. And quite frankly, running a not-for-profit, I was earning more money than the leader of the council for running a not-for-profit. But the reality was, and again, if I sound transparent, I'm not trying to be, but we were a little bit, once bitten, twice shy, where we've gone with larger recommendations in the past, I understand, only to be told, well, don't be ridiculous, there's no money. And, effectively the decisions were not ignored, but not acted on. Quite frankly, if you did any litmus test for most of the cabinet positions against the outside world, they would be pathetic as well. So, yeah, we'd love to do something about it, but again, we have recommended higher recommendations in the past and been just told that it wasn't affordable. So again, we're a little bit in our shell. We'd love to come out fighting, and I'd love to do that in the future too.
Follow up on that then, and sorry, Gerald, you're going to be mentioned here again. So knowing that, okay, don't be silly, we don't have that money, what was the reasoning behind the planning chair having a higher rise than licensing, when it would have probably just been easier just to have them exactly the same, as they're both very involved and in very different ways as well, very involved roles? So, why is the increase higher in planning? What was it about planning you thought that should have a bit more than licensing?
Again, you've got 3 members of this team, 2 that are quite experienced in the process and 1 rookie, if I can call myself that. And we're all from the private sector. And therefore, we look at accountability, responsibility and impact in a role. And our feeling very strongly was that the planning chair had a much greater, sort of a responsibility and the impact that role could have on the city than the licensing chair. And again, it keeps coming back to this roles, responsibilities and impact, accountability and responsibility. And in the private sector, I've got a chief officer of Citizens Advice Portsmouth who's paid X, and she's paid far more than Citizens Advice Gosport because of the impact and responsibility. So we kept bringing our private sector experience to a public sector problem.
I'm going to put Gerald on the spot here, if Gerald doesn't mind, to say, do you feel that the planning is more than licensing?
I'm not sure I can comment. I've never been chair of licensing.
Good answer. There were other things which I think probably will have to be decided by us when it goes to full council. It's always very difficult because at the same time, you're almost marking your own homework with these things. And as I say, at the very beginning of this, I'm very aware of the situation we're in. As I say, with cost of living, as well as the fact that the future, is unknown. I did feel that the decision-making panels, there was a slight increase more than over the scrutiny. I think that actually makes sense because the decision-making, they're actually, they're making decisions, whereas scrutiny is more of a recommendation. There were other things which I'm sure you saw, but I think the problem is going to be that it's going to have to come to us essentially in the full council, and unless we add some extra recommendations, just to say that, to say planning and licensing, for example, should be equal before it goes to full council, we could do that. Or bring down the planning to match the licensing, or we just take as as given forward from the independent panel. I have no more questions.
Thanks. Well, we could put the report to full council, and any amendments you want can be brought at council if you wanted to do something like that. So all this committee is about is to confirm that we're satisfied the way the review's been done, and then once it goes to full council for debate, amendments can be put in. Any other questions?
No, I just think it's the bits that I've done outside of the city council has been stuff at the local government association, and that's tended to be leaders and senior councillors from around the country. So when I was the deputy chair of the LGA, the other people who were there were primarily council leaders from the other groups, Jim McMahon being one of them, while he was leader of Oldham, but then the Tory leader was David Hodge, who was leader of Surrey, and the chair of the LGA was leader of a council in Lincolnshire. And now I'm deputy chair of the Children and Young People's Board, and the chair of that is another council leader, and so it tends to be that gathering in of people with fairly significant levels of experience to try to make sure that where there is a national position being taken by local government, it's done in a cross-party but knowledgeable way, and it works reasonably well. But I don't think any of us go into this in terms of elected members to get rich, because I'm very conscious that chief executive of the council when I was leader was on 5 times what I was on, and if you look at a cabinet member and a director here, it's about the same. It's about the same multiple.
I think it was more about what was aligned with what's surrounding us, and we're not. And I think that was kind of really the point, more so than obviously trying to make a leader rich. But as you say, I don't think that's quite achievable.
No, and anybody who does go into it straight rich is an idiot.
You're in the wrong job. Any other questions, members? Spencer.
First of all, Steph, to thank you. First of all, for your work on this, because it's a voluntary role as I understand it, and also your work, which I know you're not directly involved in anymore, albeit you do still contribute for Shaping Portsmouth as well. Picking up on what Councillor Simpson said, I guess to a degree, we are bolting the door once the horse has bolted, and actually some of the conversations we've had post the report have been helpful. And I appreciate, as out in your report, that you had discussions with individual members to inform the report prior. And I've got a couple of questions in terms of looking at the process for next time, whenever that might be. And I hear what you say in terms of there possibly being too big a gap between each time that you do these and trying to build up that head of steam. But in terms of our own processes and what we could do to kind of enable you to kind of maximise the job and feel that you've done as a complete job as you can, is look at our own processes. And it's perhaps a question more for us internally rather than you, but you might have some comments on it in terms of whether there'd be any benefit, as well as speaking to individuals, whether or not there was possibly some kind of cross-party group. And I think that picked up on what Councillor Vernon Jackson was talking about, a cross-party basis, and perhaps have a cross-party discussion prior to the report. And I wonder if there would be any value. So first of all, any comments you've got on that, Steph? And secondly, if you've got any more observations about the wider processes or brief that kind of on reflection you think we could do better, as I say, to help you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to comment. First of all, the meeting that James very kindly arranged was with the group leaders. I think that's the right term. We had one remote and the rest in the room. It's the first time I understand that we'd held that kind of open discussion Personally, I found it really useful. It was very respectful, like this meeting is, but it was very valuable, you know, to get the different opinions of different people and whatever else. So that was really, really useful. And, you know, things came up about, you know, venue hire and stuff like that, which kind of was broadly outside of our scope, but it was a good discussion to have. On the broader point, you know, and I've discussed this briefly with Brian and Mark, the two other panellists, I believe that the panel should be meeting every year. I believe the panel should be broader than 3. I'll give you an example, and it's not an issue at all with Brian. Brian and I were due to attend the group leaders meeting. At the last minute, his company pulled him into another meeting. So only I was there. It didn't matter. I'm a big boy. I can look after myself. But effectively, the panel, therefore, was represented by one person. So I would like to see a bit more formality about the panel. I'd like to see a role description. I'd like to see a set responsibilities. I'd like to see the meeting annually. And I'd like us to be a bit more aware of what envelope we're working in and working to. We can still challenge that. We can still step outside that. But effectively, I sense that Brian and Mark have, you know, were a bit, well, look, there's no point throwing snowballs at the moon. You know, they're not going to reach it. All right. Whereas I'm a little bit more, you know, sort of bolder and braver than that. And maybe that's only because it's my first one. So I would like to talk to whoever it is in the organisation here about making this an annual process. Brian and or Mark or whoever stays and goes are up for it. I just think it would be more valuable to the process. Because I don't know, 4 years ago when allowances were set, RPI, CPI was then taking care of them, but I don't know what other councils were doing. And if they're doing all the same, then we all just move in that same gap. It's just shocking that out of, you know, effectively, there's 7 positions, 5 of them we're bottom on. And we're not only bottom, the leader is only at 64% of the average. You know, and I know the leader of this council has other income sources from his partner to allow him to do the role. But that shouldn't be the way when you're running one of the best cities in the world, yeah, to do that. So I would like to see a bit more formality, a bit more, you know, structure to the panel, a slightly broader panel, and maybe a few more meetings between, you know, start and finish line, so that when we got to it, the consensus was there, and it was the arguments were had, and therefore, effectively, we would stand alone as being, that's our recommendation. And I know people reading, you know, sort of social media won't believe that, but I just think we should be more known to the Portsmouth public that it's us recommending this and not turkeys voting for Christmas, yeah? Yeah? So thank you for the question.
Thank you for the answer. I'm grateful.
Thank you. Is that something we could look at? I think if the committee's happy with that to come back yearly. Yeah. One slightly cheeky question. There's said in the report, during the course of the review, the panel was acutely aware of the pressures on local government finance. If money wasn't an issue, what do you think the council leader and members of the cabinet should be paid?
I can't answer that, but obviously at £21,000, when I worked in this building for Shaping Portsmouth until last year, I had a 3-day-a-week lovely administrator that was paid £22,500 a year. And this girl, literally, absolutely worth her weight in gold, but did not carry the same responsibility as Councillor Pitt or Councillor Vernon Jackson before him. So, yeah, love to have a go at that, but I imagine that it might be complex.
Thank you. Gerald.
Just a small point, Steph, when you're looking next time. As you'll be aware, I spent last year caring for John over his last months. I never claimed carer's allowance. It just got too complicated. But the rate is set at national minimum wage. If I was getting a carer in to look after John from an agency, it would be at least double that. So national minimum wage doesn't cover it. I don't know if there is a system by which so the money doesn't go through councillors' hands or whatever, whether we could look at a system by which the council would provide through the agency a carer or something like that. But actually it didn't work for me. I managed to find ways around it. But for somebody else who was caring, saying you're going to pay national minimum wage doesn't in any way cover the cost of getting somebody in as a carer. Even if that's what they're being paid, the agency will take a big slice on top.
Thank you. Yes, I know we said we'd like to revisit that. It came quite late to us as a question in the process, and it's obviously a big subject. And can I just say, Gerald, I wasn't aware of John's passing. I'm sorry I wasn't, and if I'd known, then I would have been at the funeral. I don't do social media, therefore I'm afraid I missed it. So my sincere apologies to you, indeed. But yeah, no, we'd love to look at it. As I said, I'm just saying that I think the panel, constructed correctly, objectively focused, would have a much better value add to the council than it has today, which is, a 4-year cycle of effectively just, probably turning the handle a bit and whatever else. And as I said, I did, as those of you know me know, I'm a data freak. So when I asked James for the data for the other councils, I was appalled at the position that this council pays its allowances to these important positions. But we are where we are, and I'd like to work with you guys on a roadmap to getting us to a different place.
And again, I just wonder if it is worth, as well, when we're looking in future, to look at the salary level of the Police and Crime Commissioner, who has a much less responsible job in terms of operational stuff, and also we're going to have imposed on us an elected mayor for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and I don't know what salary level that will be at, but that might be interesting comparisons as well within the family of local government.
I'd like to work with somebody or a few people to set out the scope of responsibility for the group, the panel, and whatever that actually sensibly contains, then we should do it. And I know that there is political eggshells here to tread on, but we shouldn't be shy of actually just knowing the comparison data because it's important.
I think that's definitely something we need to look at in the future. Thank you. Any other questions? Right, in that case, members, it is recommended that the Governance and Audits and Standards Committee A, confirms it is satisfied with the way the Independent Remuneration Panel undertook the review, and B, recommends that the City Council considers and decides upon the recommendations of the Independent Remuneration Panel as set out in the panel's report, attached as Appendix 1, when agreeing a scheme of members' allowances to take effect from the 2025-2026 financial year. It's also that the Independent Review Panel be retained as a standing panel in the interim period to consider any issues that arise in connection with the scheme before the next review, either by email or in meetings, and that members thank the Independent Remuneration Panel for their work in reviewing the members' allowance scheme. Do I have a proposer? Thank you, Gerald. And seconder, Russell. Thank you. And is that agreed, members? Agreed. Thank you, Steph. Now, next, item 7, Treasury Management Monitoring Report, Q3, Agenda Supplement 1. Richard Webb, Deputy Director of Finance and Resources, and Helen Clem, Finance Manager, are in attendance to introduce the report and answer questions. Members have read the report. Is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
Thank you, Chair. No, there's nothing really that we need to draw attention to for the members. Just to say this report has come here for scrutiny. It's for the third quarter. There's been no significant changes between Q2's report and this report. We've not made any breaches of our Treasury management policy. We've not undertaken any new borrowing. We still have sufficient liquidity. And at last meeting, there was a question raised about the risks as to where the council invests its surplus cash. So we have included on page 12 of this report a chart showing you the various institutions that we have our surplus cash invested for the next 12 months. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions on the report? No? Nothing in that case. Members, it is recommended that the Council's Treasury management activities have remained within the Treasury Management Policy 2024-2025 in the period up to 31st of December 2024, and the actual Treasury management indicators as at 31st of December 2024 set out in Appendix A be noted. Are these noted, members? Noted. Thank you. Item 8, report to Governance, Audits and Standards Committee on complaints received into alleged breaches of the Code of Conduct by members of the Council for the calendar year 2024. Peter Balfe, City Solicitor, is present to introduce the item. Members have received and read the report. Is there anything you particularly wish to highlight to the committee?
Nothing from my perspective. It's sort of business as usual. Nothing terribly trend orientated beyond the usual comments that most of my complaints come from social media. And I say that virtually every year, as we all know. So I'm happy to take questions on that report. Thank you.
Members, any questions? Gerald, any questions on the report for the complaints received for alleged breaches of the Code of Conduct?
No. Was I done for anything?
Yeah, we're in line. We're in firing line.
So I wasn't found out.
No, you're still with us, Gerald.
In that case, recommendations. Members, it's recommended that the committee notes the report. There's no real further action required by us, I don't think. No. So, is that agreed, members? Thank you. In that case, the final item is item 9, process for the nomination of honorary alderman. James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer, is in attendance to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So I think the report's fairly self-explanatory. Members will remember that this comes from a notice of motion that was agreed on the 12th of November at full council. The recommendations are that a task and finish group be set up comprising members of the gas committee, both standing deputies and full members, to form a task and finish group to research what other councils do, come up with a recommendation to be considered by this committee at a future meeting for adoption. I'm aware, Chair, that Councillor Benedict Swan and Councillor Graham Heaney have put their names forward and they'd be keen to be part of the working group. And ideally it would be a cross-party working group comprising all groups on the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other members fancy being part of the group? Gerald? So that's one from Labour, one from the Conservatives, and Russell. So that's one from each party. Perfect. So, thank you. Recommendations. The cross-party Governance and Audits and Standards Committee appoints a cross-party task and finish group from this membership, which I think we've now got the full membership, to undertake the request to review and submit a recommendation for the consideration by Governance, Audits and Standards Committee at a future meeting. And that the draft terms of reference of the review, Appendix C of the report, are agreed. Members, is the terms of reference agreed? Thank you. And in that case, thank you, members. That concludes the business on the agenda for this meeting. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you.